I am a very strong believer that everyone needs to know how to sew a button. So if you don't know, stick around. And if you do, well, this will be a refresher course for you. Hi, I'm Allie, the Literary Sewist. Here in my crafting castle, I create projects inspired by the books I review. But today, I'm going to make sure you know this post-apocalyptic life skill. When you're sewing, there are several different types of buttons that you'll come across. The two primary ones we're going to come across are the shank buttons and the flat buttons. These are the ones I'm going to show you how to sew today, and I'll give you an overview of a few of the ones I have on hand as well. Some of the other common ones you'll see are toggle buttons, which you commonly see on jackets, more for decorative purposes or just to hook a little loop over. There's also stud buttons, which are found on almost every pair of jeans. Probably go look in your closet and you'll see a stud button there. These are some of the flat buttons and shank buttons I have on hand. Let me go over which one makes them different. This 4-hole flower button is perfect for little kids' clothes. This big one is better for jackets and adult clothes. You'll see 2-hole buttons on most shirts, and decorative buttons on fancier projects like dresses and jackets. Shank buttons are often seen in gemstone, pearlized, and bubble styles. Metal shank buttons are often domed like this, where they're rounded on the front and dip in the back. Flat shank buttons also have very distinctive look. They're flat all the way on the front and all the way on the back. This one may look like a flat button, but it is a shank button because it only has the one hole that you sew through on the back. Let's talk needles and thread. Thicker needles are better for heavier weight fabrics. Longer needles are good for layers and larger projects. These little skinny ones come in most hand sewing kits and are perfect for most buttons. Needle threaders are super handy to have on hand, especially when you have the tiny needles. Let me show you how they work. Slide the thin wires into the needle head hole. The wires are delicate, so be careful not to jam them in. With the needle at the base of the threader, slide the thread through the wires, then match up the two ends of the thread. Pull the thread taut, then slide the needle off the wires onto the thread. Match the threader to the ends of the thread and cut off the threader. Tie the end in a knot, or two. This will prevent the thread from pulling through your fabric. Let's sew 2-hole buttons. Holding your button in place and starting from the back of the fabric, poke your threaded needle through one of the holes. Pull the thread completely through the fabric and hole. Go slow so you do not tangle it up. Flip the fabric over so the button is on top, then poke the needle through the other hole. Pull through to the back. Make sure the thread is taut to keep the button snug to the fabric. Poke through in the same spot as the knotted end. Now repeat these steps 2 to 3 more times to secure the button. To tie off the thread, poke the needle through the threads on the back and wrap the thread around the needle 3 times. Hold the looped thread tight to the fabric where your needle is poking through. Then pull the needle through the fabric in loops. This will create a knot. Slide the needle through the thread one more time. Make sure all of the thread is through so it isn't tangled. Then snip it off. Let's sew 4-hole buttons. This will start off the same way as the 2-hole button, but you will be sewing through the holes crisscross from the last hole. Poke the needle through from the back, pull taut, then poke down through the hole across from it, but not next to the one you came through. Flip over to the back side. You will need to locate one of the open holes. Targeting halfway between the 2 already used holes, the one you want will be slightly offset. Flip back over to the front, pulling the thread taut, poke through the last open hole. Now you can poke through where the knot started out. Repeat this pattern 2 to 3 more times. Tie off the same way as shown with the 2-hole button. Let's sew shank buttons. Shank buttons only have one hole that allows the button to hover above the fabric, so it's a little difficult to see where you're going to poke your needle through. Mark your button placement with your thumb, holding the spot for the shank, then poke the needle through from the back. Thread the button onto the needle and pull flush to the fabric. Poke through to the back of the fabric as close to the button as possible. On the back side of the fabric, while holding the button in place, thread the needle through the fabric and the shank at the same time, starting at the original knot and ending where the thread came through in the last step. Repeat this whip stitch 3 to 4 more times until it feels secure. Tie off in the same way as shown with the 2-hole button. And you're all done. This is what your buttons will look like from the front and the back. I know this was a ton of information, but I promise it's a lot simpler than it sounds. Plus, you never know when you'll need to sew a button on real quick. If this video gave you that skill you need for that post-apocalyptic life, give this video a thumbs up. And while you're here, why don't you subscribe to this channel for future installments of my bookish sewing goodness. And in the meantime, pop on over and check out some more sewing tutorials and book-inspired goodness. We'll see you next time. Who's ready for the apocalypse? I am. I know how to sew a button.